Seated, the House has resumed its sitting. Any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I therefore call on the mover, Honorable Premier, to wind up the bill. Don't have much afraid.
Mr. Speaker, as I sat here listening to the contributions of members from the opposition to the debate on this important amendment bill, the Immigration Amendment Bill 2018, I received a WhatsApp message from a person in the community, and all it said was, Mr. Premier, a positive mind finds opportunity in everything, while the negative mind finds faults in everything. That, Mr. Speaker, was notably received during the contribution of the member from Georgetown Central. Mr. Speaker, I can't pretend to have the many years that you have in this infernal vocation called politics. Infernal, I-N-F-E-R-N-A-L. In case anyone thought I was saying a bad word. But approaching 18 years and 5 terms, I have learned a long time ago that you should not get too excited about the bouquets, few though they are, or too upset at the brickbats, because you need, as Rudyard Kipling's If tells you, to treat triumph and disaster as the imposters they are. And so, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to what members in here say, or when it comes to what those on the talk shows say, or what those in the media say, when I see the encomiums sometimes in the editorials of the Cayman Compass, I smile wryly, for I know that within the course of a week, they shall condemn me and everything we do about something. So I don't get too excited about all of those things, Mr. Speaker. The one thing I know, Mr. Speaker, it is a whole lot easier, it must be a whole lot easier to sit and opine on what those that actually do. It must be a wonderful thing to have the freedom to say whatever you think with no consequence. You write one editorial today that says it is a great thing to allow all and sundry to come to Cayman, and next week you write an editorial that says it's a terrible thing. And it makes not a jot of difference. When I say something, when members of this House say something, when the government does something, when members of this House pass legislation, it means a great deal. We collectively have the real responsibility for what happens or doesn't happen in this country. And I never, Mr. Speaker, I never forget that in anything I say, in anything I do, anywhere. It is an incredible responsibility. And only those that bear it or have borne it even begin to understand what that means. And so, Mr. Speaker, I don't ignore what the media says, but I take it all in stride. I just wish, Mr. Speaker, that the media in this country would give Caymanians a chance. I really wish that there was the odd Caymanian voice and brain and pen or finger, because most people don't write with these days, writing some of these articles, covering some of these stories, writing some of these editorials, so that there might be some Caymanian perspective injected into what is said. Mr. Speaker, the editorial which someone, I'm not even sure which member of the House referred to and laid on the table of the House, dated the 29th of May this year, is one of those that has no bouquets for me, or indeed Minister Mark Taggart, the Minister of Finance, who I think are the principal subjects of the editorial. But in relation to the work department and the efforts that we are making there to, among other things, secure durable employment and opportunities for the advancement of Caymanians through development, training, internship, apprenticeships, and partnerships with private sector businesses. Has been described as my brainchild in the most disparaging of terms. Why he would claim paternity of this amalgamation is beyond us, they say. And they generally pour acid on our efforts to ensure that Caymanians are able to participate in what they call the economic miracle. For the life of me, Mr. Speaker, I will never understand why those who have come here and done so well don't ever seem to appreciate, or some of them I should say, appreciate that what makes this place work when other places don't. Work in terms, I mean, of the general harmony and the relationships between those who have come as immigrants and those who were born of this place, is because, by and large, over the many years, Caymanians have understood, at least the more discerning of them, that having people come here and work and invest and form businesses has created tremendous economic opportunities in which Caymanians were able to participate. And if we do not somehow get this formula back to where, the balance back to where it needs to be, the resentments, which are clear and obvious to anyone who is paying attention, are going to continue to grow. And those people, those Caymanians, some in this house, who do not have the experience of an Alden McLaughlin or an Arden McLean, the elected member from East End, because of the time we grew up in, and who believe that Cayman was always like this, where there were all sorts of economic opportunities, and once we throw all of the foreigners out, Caymanians will be able to benefit from all of this. When they take control, when they are allowed to take control, because Caymanians start to feel that people like myself aren't doing enough for Caymanians, the David Legges and the others like that will come to understand in a most bitter way why it was important that we create an agency like Work, why we push forward initiatives which are aimed at giving Caymanians greater opportunities to share in the economic progress and prosperity of this place. That's why this so-called brainchild of mine is moving ahead. And I don't claim it as my brainchild. This is the product of a great deal of thought by a large group of people. I am the Premier and the Minister with responsibility for immigration, and so I am heading up the initiative. But this is the collective work and vision of the government that I have the honor to lead. And, Mr. Speaker, with the full support and incredible hard work and belief of the civil servants and others who are helping us to do it, led by an excellent chief officer in Mr. Wesley Howell. That's what this is. That's what this is. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank those members of the opposition who have made positive and constructive contributions with respect to the bill. As I said at the start, we understand that this is an ongoing process as we continue to try to shape our immigration policies and legislation to meet the changing circumstances in our community and to address areas where it is obvious the legislation has been deficient. Mr. Speaker, this country started concerning itself about immigration and work permits in the late 60s. I think the first piece of legislation was the Work Permit Law of 1969, followed by the Caymanian Protection Law of 1971. And it was called the Caymanian Protection Law for a very real reason. The issues that are still here now, these years hence, were issues identified by our forebears, those who went before us, as a real challenge. In 1971, the population of these islands was only 10,000 people. They understood what the impact of immigration could be, both positive and negative, and the legislation was about ensuring that Caymanians had a chance, a first chance at employment and economic opportunities where they were able to do so. And despite the challenges, as I said, to to the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Cayman annual conference last week. There have been challenges, there have been issues, there have been problems, and there still are. But overall, the system has worked for us as a country and a people, and it is still working for us as a country and a people, notwithstanding what some of the more negative and pessimistic of us may say and think. As the member from Bordentown West said, if unemployment is 5%, that means 95% of our people are employed. You can look at it whichever way you wish. And those of us who tend to be more positive in our thought process will say that that is not too bad a position in which to be. Mr. Speaker, the member from East End spoke about a number of things. The first point I want to try to clarify for him is with respect to persons who are married to Caymanians and who apply for and obtain a residence and employment rights certificate. The objective of the change to the relevant section in the immigration law is to allow a person who has an RERC to be able to apply for permanent residence when they reach 7 years, not at the outset, not the moment they get the RERC. So they are able to apply for your regular permanent residence provision at 7 years. Mr. Speaker, the other point which is actually not contained in the bill, which I know the member is anxious about, as is the government, about having Caymanians or requiring Caymanians to prove that they are Caymanians in order to get employment. As I said at the start, if any of us believed, or if any of the broader public comes to believe that persons who are not Caymanians are being allowed to work without permits or to obtain scholarships or any of the social benefits which are generally available to Caymanians alone, there would be a hue and cry the other way. So we can't go to a system which is so informal or so lax that the system is easy to beat. And that's what creates the challenge that we are currently in. Let me say to the member that the suggestion that we use the voters' registration card is one that the government has given serious consideration to. As he identified, that would not be a perfect solution for at least two reasons. One is that there are people we know, as we keep finding, who are on the voters' registration list and who have got on there, some because of historic reasons, some for other reasons, who are actually, when you drill down, are not Caymanian and therefore not entitled to be on the list. But we think those numbers are, as he said, relatively small. The other issue with it is that would only assist persons who are over the age of 18 and are registered as voters. So those who are not registered, it wouldn't assist. And so we said, fine, that wouldn't be a perfect solution, but it would go a long way. Our concern is and that's an abiding concern which we are working on, is that once we say legislatively that a voter's registration card is proof positive of Caymanian status, that card acquires a whole new value than hitherto it has had. And therefore, its security features need to be significantly enhanced to reduce the ability of it to be forged. We are not satisfied, and I can say Alden is not satisfied, that at this stage, the voter's registration card that we are currently using is sufficiently secure that I could hand on heart tell this country, we can be certain that anybody who has that card is a Caymanian. So, but you still have to prove that you are that person. Right. So, hence, those of you who may have heard or read about the speech I made at a conference last week would know that the government is exploring the establishment, the creation of a digital ID. We believe, and all the advice we have had, is that this is not only quite doable, but doable in a relatively short period of time. And that this would allow everyone, because we wouldn't be just talking about Caymanians who would have a digital ID now, but it would be everybody who's here. Right. But this would allow you, that this one card would allow, would be capable of dealing with things like driver's licenses, a full range of things, access to social services, benefits, voter's ID, your citizenship, or whether you're on work permit, and a whole range of things, which would avoid, you'd always have to prove in the first instance that you're Caymanian, but you do it once and for all, and thereafter, it should be relatively smooth sailing. So that is what the government is currently looking at. I take on board certainly what the member from East End said about, and I believe he's right, there ought to be no requirement that you have to have, in the circumstances he described, an acknowledgement from the immigration board or the chief immigration officer that the person is Caymanian in the circumstances which he described. Because it depends where the person was born. Right. But the circumstances which the member described, which is his son born in Cayman of Caymanian parents. Right. You don't need an acknowledgement, you just need the birth certificates. Agreed. Agreed. But if the child were born somewhere else, then it becomes more complicated, and that's where the acknowledgement. Agreed. But I'm saying that what the member from East End has said, I think is absolutely right, and we need to issue the necessary policy direction that this is acceptable. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition expressed certain concerns about the duplication of powers and authority being given to the Interim Director of Work while the Chief Immigration Officer still has them. Mr. Speaker, I hear what he says, but really we don't know how else we get around this during the transition period, because quite clearly the Interim Director needs to have certain powers to be able to be effective in the role that she has. Because this This is no longer some idea, as it has been for at least a decade. This is happening. We are expecting the work department to be fully operational very early next year. We are expecting the amalgamation of customs and immigration functions with respect to border control to be effective closer to the end of this year. So this is happening. This is real. And we've got to give the people who are carrying out these roles the powers and authority they need to do the job. I also note his concerns, Mr. Speaker, about oh Lord, I rely on my memory too much. I also note his concerns, Mr. Speaker, about why the work agency should still continue to have responsibility for dealing with permanent residence and Cayman status applications. Mr. Speaker, what the member from Prospect said is absolutely the case. But also, Mr. Speaker, we can decide whether we want to create yet another department in government to deal just with Caymanian status and permanent residency applications, or whether this agency, a unit within this agency, will manage those aspects. And we believe that, at least for the time being, that is the best place for it to reside, rather than creating a whole brand new department to deal just with that, with all of the apparatus and resources, including human, that would be required to set that up. Those who are helping to design the system, many of them are actually working in the system and are able to provide the kind of insight and guidance that we think is so important as we go about this. So I would ask him and others to be patient and to give us a chance. Mr. Speaker, I really did not derive any benefit from the rant by the member from Georgetown Central, and so I don't really propose to comment on any of that. He wasn't in the chamber when I read little aphorism that was sent to me by someone while he was speaking. So while he's here now, I will offer that to him again. This was sent to me by someone outside these chambers while he was making his contribution. A positive mind finds opportunity in everything, while the negative mind finds faults in everything. Mr. Speaker, in the almost 18 years I have been here, I have never known a new member of this House to so quickly become a leper. You see where he sits? He is neither fish nor fowl. The opposition don't want him, and the government don't want him. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because no one can work with him. Mr. Speaker, I would urge the member, Mr. Speaker, unless he has a point of order, Mr. Speaker, he should sit down.
What is the point of order? Relevance to the debate, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, this is very relevant to what he said, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I gather that the Premier is replying to your debate. And he has that right. If you find that he's misleading, then that's a point. Well, he's replying to your debate, and thus far, that's what it is, a reply to your debate. If I find that he has gone outside of that, well, that's different. But
Mr. Speaker, forgive me for maybe my inexperience in respect to parliamentary proceedings, but where I sit in Parliament and what element of who wants to work with me has no relevance in respect to the debate of what I've said to him or said in respect to my contributions. So unless you, this Honorable House, by the way of the Chair, can explain to me the relevance of that, or he can, then I don't quite understand the relevance.
maybe that the Premier is finished with that point. You see, that's what I was trying to motion to you. People who like to sport a new shoe, they don't like the pinch sometimes. But I would think that he has said that he's not going deeply in it. That's what he has said. So I gather that he was finishing.
Mr. Speaker, that is exactly an example of what I'm trying to say. Mr. Speaker, what I learned a long time ago is that if you want to be good at something, if you want to be useful to your people, you got to learn. You got to learn how the system works. You got to learn to work with people. Politics is the art of the possible, and it's also the art of compromise. There's a reason why there are so many people here working together and so many people there working together. Because you cannot even move a motion in this House unless you get someone else as a private member, unless you can get someone to agree. And I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Georgetown Central are not being adequately represented and will not be adequately
Mr. Speaker,
represented
relevance, Mr. Speaker.
as long, Mr. Speaker, as the member, if you would listen instead of jumping up every minute, as long as the member from Georgetown Central, the current member, does not recognize that to get anything done in this House, he needs to work with members who are here, and that the worst chance you have of persuading anybody to help you is to continue to beat them about the head. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I know you had referenced the chair on this matter, but I will tell you from experience, and as the speaker and as this chair, listen to sound advice. That is good sound advice. You're a new member, and others, I would say the same to them. The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Immigration Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Immigration Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018.
The Advanced Passenger Information Bill, the Honorable Premier. The Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Premier wish to speak thereto?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018 seeks to create a legal framework for the transmission, collection, use, and sharing of advanced passenger information. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, advanced passenger information involves the capture of biographical data concerning passengers and crew members, as well as other flight or cruise details prior to departure and the subsequent transmission of the information by electronic means to the border control authorities in the destination country. Mr. Speaker, the government is working toward a number of initiatives aimed at strengthening and modernizing our national security framework as it relates to border protection and public safety. A comprehensive regime through which to leverage advanced passenger information will serve as a critical decision-making tool that our border control authorities can employ to assist in the process of screening passengers and crew members against law enforcement and intelligence databases to identify high-risk passengers. In turn, this bill will allow our border control officials with information necessary to request airlines in the foreign jurisdiction to deny boarding to such persons in appropriate circumstances, or if warranted, to initiate intensive questioning upon arrival. As called for in the UN Security Council Resolution 2178, 39 countries now require airlines to send advanced passenger information before a flight's arrival. Many others are also actively working towards the introduction of similar requirements. And it is our hope, Mr. Speaker, that members of this House will see the clear national security and public safety benefits of Cayman requiring aircraft and vessels to provide advanced passenger information as well. The proposals put forth in this new bill reflect an increased awareness in the need for the Cayman Islands to undergo security transformation to protect our borders and continually contribute to the safety of all passengers and crew members arriving and departing these islands. Mr. Speaker and honorable members will appreciate that the scale, scope, and complexity of national security is transforming, and as such, technologies, intelligence sharing methods, and risk assessment techniques are evolving. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands also needs to ensure that we have comprehensive and diverse mechanisms that can provide for the exchange of information necessary to allow border security resources to be directed towards these areas where they are most likely to produce significant results in the interest of security and public safety. Mr. Speaker, while existing legislation provides for arriving aircraft and vessels to provide passenger information to the Department of Immigration, this data is only cross-checked against limited databases. With the passage of this bill, the Cayman Islands will have a comprehensive program through which Cayman's border control officials will be able to benefit from information sharing with our security services partners, allowing Cayman's border security officials to more effectively identify passengers or crew members posing risks or threats to public safety, such as those involved in serious and organized criminal enterprises or terrorism. The bill, Mr. Speaker, seeks to enhance collaboration with our regional and international intelligence partners to sophisticatedly manage risks relative to border security and passenger facilitation with respect to arrivals and departures. Advanced passenger information data on all passengers and crew members will be transmitted to the Joint Regional Communications Center, where specialists will invoke a process of cross-checking all relevant data against a number of intelligence watch lists, international law enforcement databases, and Interpol databases. Subsequently, the Joint Regional Communications Center will communicate the results to Cayman's border control officials, allowing for targeted security and law enforcement action as necessary. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, in combination with other strategic approaches to border control, the comprehensive use of API, that is Advanced Passenger Intelligence, will contribute to a decrease in airport clearance times for the majority of passengers, the vast majority of whom are legitimate, low-risk, law-abiding travelers. Mr. Speaker, I would like to now explain some of the key elements of this bill. The Advanced Passenger Information Bill will require that the local agent, captain, or master provide information or data to the Department of Immigration and Joint Regional Communications Center concerning crew members, passengers, or other persons traveling in an aircraft or vessel. The specific information is contained in Schedule 1 of the bill, which addresses data relating to the flight or voyage of such as vessel identification, scheduled departure and arrival dates and times, as well as data about each individual on the vessels. However, Mr. Speaker, if it is determined that the persons responsible for providing this information fail to do so, the bill also provides for penalties. While the bill legally mandates the provision of passenger information, it is recognized that there will be circumstances whereby vessels or aircraft may not be able to adhere to this requirement for legitimate reasons. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the bill allows for discretion by the Department of Immigration or its successor with regard to the provision of manifest or other passenger or crew information to allow the vessel or aircraft to land under particular circumstances such as emergencies, accidents, or unfavorable weather conditions. Additionally, Schedule 2 provides the legal time each local agent, captain, or master must adhere to as it relates to the provision of the passenger or crew member information or data to the Department of Immigration. In addition, the bill also details the powers and duties of the Department of Immigration or its successor and stipulates the processes to be followed and agencies that must be provided with passenger information. While passengers will be allowed access to the advanced passenger information data, the bill restricts passenger access to watch lists both locally and regionally. Mr. Speaker, it is also important to note that the current immigration law provides for exemptions for the departure and arrival of recreational sport fishing vessels. Likewise, the bill also provides for the similar exemptions, allowing for the cultural practices to continue amongst local fishermen with regard to registered sport fishing vessels venturing beyond the 12 nautical mile threshold before returning to the islands. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the bill will provide the governing framework to support the Cayman Islands in its ongoing collaboration with global law enforcement and security services. This includes CARICOM's implementing agency for crime and security and its sub-agency, the Joint Regional Communications Center. With the passage of the bill, the Joint Regional Communications Center will provide specialist intelligence analysis services to further assist Cayman's border security and law enforcement personnel in the detection of persons who are traveling with stolen, lost, and fraudulent travel documents, along with the identification of and monitoring the movements of persons of interest, including those who may be a high security threat to the safety and security of the region. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that all airline and maritime industries have sufficient time to ensure compliance, the commencement of the bill will take effect 3 months after it has been passed in this Honorable House. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker and Honorable Members, this bill allows intelligence sharing as required to further develop and strengthen substantive national and regional frameworks for addressing crime and security threats. Mr. Speaker, the bill will support the government in providing the public with a modernized border security framework to complement anticipated growth in passenger volumes, manage inherent security risks, and improve the experience of passengers. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I wish to commend and thank all parties involved in bringing this bill to this stage. And therefore recommend the Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018 for the favorable consideration of this House. I thank you for the opportunity to present the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be extremely brief. And my only comments, I think I have 3 comments to make, which, again, hopefully will be constructive, and they can be posed as questions, and hopefully the Honorable Premier, when he responds, will clear them up. But I'm looking at the bill, Mr. Speaker, and I'm seeing from my understanding of what is happening, the watch list is being used to scrub names, basically, of passengers. And I see that it's clearly, for terrorism activity, criminal activity, and individuals involved in that sort of stuff. But I see that there's a sort of catch-all at the end of that, Mr. Speaker, where it says, other persons of interest to the intelligence community. And I'm a little wary of that because of the fact that all of us in here, just using us as examples, are political exposed persons. I know some of those watch lists have political exposed persons within them. So there may be a danger that one of us traveling would cause a hit when they're doing that scrubbing, which would cause unnecessary issues. You have peps from all over the region, all over the world, really, traveling. So I don't know how streamlined that will be, but it's something to watch out for, just as a suggestion, Mr. Speaker. And also in terms of, I heard the Premier say that we're exempting recreational sports fishing vessels, which is excellent, and I support that. But I do have a question when it comes to vessels which are involved in commercial fishing, which may not have the technology or sophistication to comply with this law. Sometimes those same vessels are vessels that we probably need to keep an eye on. Some of them may be involved in criminal activity, but some are legit. And I just wonder if that is going to pose a problem in terms of, I see a number of boats coming here from Honduras and Jamaica selling fish, and there's a pretty vibrant fishing industry around us that we rely on. So I didn't know if that would pose a problem for that particular aspect of it, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, just as a suggestion, based on my experience with technology, I note that we've put the API format in the law. It may be a suggestion, Mr. Speaker, to put that in the regulations, because I don't know how often this format would change, but the ones I'm familiar with, some of them change regularly, as you have to keep complying with international standards. So it may be better to put them in the regulations so that every time there's a change, you don't have to change the law. But apart from that, Mr. Speaker, well, clearly we support this on this side of the House. It is a good step forward in terms of making travel to and from the Cayman Islands a lot more efficient. And of course, I think all the members on this side will support the bill. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? We'll call on the Premier to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that indulgence. Mr. Speaker, I'll try to respond to, I think, with 3 points really that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition raised. Dealing with the last one first, we think that's an excellent suggestion, and I think we will try to get a committee stage amendment to move that into regulations as the member has suggested. With respect to the politically exposed persons, as they relate to Cayman, we obviously control that list here, so there will be no issues for us here. With respect to other jurisdictions, we already share that information with regionally in any event, and we really are not in control of how they deal with the information that they receive any more than they're in control of how we deal with the information we receive. And again, relying on this fallible memory of mine, the third one was, yes, the commercial fishing vessels. The commercial fishing vessels. Those who operate this system recognize that we will need a simplified, a more simple, I hate to use that word, but a simpler system with respect to the commercial fishing vessels, which might even just relate to a phone call or information in that way, rather than following the strict form that is used with respect to the cruise ships and the aircraft and so forth. Mr. Speaker, again, thanks for the indulgence as I consulted on that. But we think that the measures that the member from East End is referring to are with respect to the changes that were made in 2015, which removed the provision from the immigration law which had tied the APIS, that is the requirement for the exchange of information, tied that into the immigration law and the requirements, and which affected sports fishing and commercial fishing. So that's standing here. I can't do any better. I can't do any better than I'm doing now. But that's what we think he was referring to. So, but unfortunately, I can't at this point provide any more information than that. But Mr. Speaker, we'll have a look at it between now and when we come to committee stage, and to see if there's anything else that we need to do in that regard. And I just wish to thank members of the opposition, the one member who has spoken, for his support and his contribution, and others for their tacit support of what we believe is an important bill and an important part of the measures that we are taking to try to further secure our border while increasing comfort and convenience of travel.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Advanced Passenger Information Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to defer this bill until the next meeting. The reason for it, Mr. Speaker, is we are trying to sort out the issue of who should chair this body, and the time with which we've had to resolve that has not been sufficient, and I want to continue to explore. I don't want to rush us into a decision about who should chair this very august body without more careful consideration to make sure that we get the person who holds the right office, shall I put it that way, because it's not so much an individual, but the office to chair it. So I would prefer to defer this until the next meeting of the House. So I so move.
The question is that the National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill 2018 be carried over to the next meeting. The next meeting, not the next sitting, the next meeting. The next meeting of this Honorable House. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
The Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018.
The utility. The Honorable Premier.
Let it not be said I don't have to sing for my supper, sir.
You're doing that.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Public Authorities Law commenced on the 1st of June this year. This bill, that is the Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018, seeks primarily to make certain provisions in the Utility Regulation and Competition Law consistent with the Public Authorities Law. Clause 2 of the amendment bill seeks to provide a definition for Chief Fuels Inspector and redefines the term executive member to make clear the positions that are included within this categorization. Clause 3 seeks to amend Section 14 of the Principal Law to increase the non-executive, i.e. the private sector members of the board from 5 to 6 for a total of 10 members. This increase will make the composition of the board consistent with the requirements of the Public Authorities Law, which provides that a board shall not be comprised of more than 40% public or civil servants. Clause 4 seeks to amend Section 17 of the law to replace the references of office to instead refer to the board, thereby ensuring that the chair's duties properly relate to the activities of the board. Clause 5 seeks to amend Section 23 of the law to address inconsistencies with the Public Authorities Law in relation to provisions for the voting procedures of the board. It establishes that executive board members who are public servants, including the chief executive officer, do not have a right to vote at board meetings. That each voting board member has one vote. The decisions of the board shall be adopted by a simple majority, and that in the event of an equality of votes, the chairman has a second casting vote. Clause 6 seeks to amend Section 28 of the law to remove the words "to the board," to clarify that in line with the Public Authorities Law, the appointment of the CEO is to be made by the board. Clause 7 seeks to amend Section 29 of the law to provide for the appointment of the executive directors and the chief fuels inspector by the CEO. Currently, the law provides for the CEO to be appointed by cabinet and for the executive directors and the chief fuels officer to be appointed by the board. The amendment also removes the reference to the chief petroleum inspector, and now the chief fuels inspector. Clause 8 seeks to amend Section 30 of the law to remove the references to executive directors in relation to the board's powers to suspend or revoke appointments, and to make the grounds for suspension or revocation of the appointment of the CEO consistent with the Public Authorities Law. Clause 9 seeks to provide for the validity and continuation of the appointments of the current CEO and the executive directors made prior to the commencement of the Public Authorities Law. This clause reads as follows: notwithstanding the commencement of the Public Authorities Law 2017, the appointment of the Chief Executive Officer and the Executive Directors under Section 28 and 29 prior to the commencement of this law shall be valid and shall continue. Mr. Speaker, a key concern arising from the non-compliant provisions in the Utility Regulation and Competition Law was the possibility that the ongoing proceedings and decisions of the Regulation and Competition Office, known to us as OFREG, post the June 1st, 2017 commencement date of the Public Authorities Law could be subject to judicial review based on inconsistencies between its governing legislation, the Utility Regulation and Competition Law, and the Public Authorities Law. Clause 10, which is a validation clause, seeks to address this concern. The clause sets out the following: any acts, decisions, or proceedings of the board that were carried out prior to the commencement of this law shall not be invalid by reason only of those acts, decisions, or proceedings being inconsistent with the Public Authorities Law 2017. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to recommend the Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018 to this Honorable House, and I hereby request the support and approval of members for its successful passage through this august legislative assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the Premier to wind up.
Mr. Speaker, only to thank members for their tacit support of this bill.
Thank you. Clerk? We did? Getting that time of the night. All those in favor? The question is, that a bill shortly entitled the Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Utility Regulation and Competition Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Information and Communication Technology Amendment Bill 2018.
Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I should explain that the reason why I am speaking to most of these is that these are areas that are covered by the Utility Regulation and Competition Regulation. So it's not about the operational aspects of the information technology. It's about the regulation bits.
Understood.
So, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of the Information and Communications Technology Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the member wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very small amendment. Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 of the bill seeks to repeal and replace Section 100 of the principal law concerning conflict of laws to ensure that information and communications technology law is subject to the Public Authorities Law 2017. That's the only effect of the amendment. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to recommend this bill and to request the support and approval for its successful passage by all members of this honorable House.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I therefore call on the Premier to wind up.
Again, Mr. Speaker, just to thank all members for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Information and Communications Technology Amendment Law 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. The Information and Communications Technology Amendment Law 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Traffic Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable Minister for Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, brings me pleasure to bring before this honorable House the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018. Mr. Speaker, I believe there has been about 16 amendments since the enactment of the traffic law in 1973, with the most recent and extensive review taking place in 2011. Mr. Speaker, this constant reconsideration speaks to the importance of such a law in our everyday lives, and is also evident of government's commitment to bettering the lives and safety of our people on our streets. Mr. Speaker, this is no more obvious than us striving to have a sophisticated law that assists our modern technologically savvy society that wants and deserves efficiency with seamless and transparent use as they go about their daily lives, whether motoring along our roadways or cycling or as a pedestrian. Mr. Speaker, the review of the traffic law commenced under the previous PPM-led administration, where a myriad of stakeholders, including the Honorable AG's chambers, the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, and other ministries such as Home Affairs and Tourism and the private sector, were consulted. These discussions were long and soul-searching, Mr. Speaker. We tried to be pragmatic in balancing efficiency and a sense of fairness with the reality of the lives of our everyday lives of our citizens. Mr. Speaker, I will expand on this by speaking to the changes in detail within the bill in hopes that honorable members and those watching or listening will realize the benefits and importance of these revisions. First, Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 of the bill introduces a number of new or revised definitions. Mr. Speaker, it was necessary for the definitions to be updated to reflect the continued modernization of the law, to better allow for the use of cameras, electronic reading devices, and electronic tags in relation to the now operational electronic vehicle registration, or the EVR system. New types of vehicles and the usage thereof, and to fully comply with the treaties that Cayman are a party to. Mr. Speaker, while I touch on most of these as I go through the bill, let me expand on the latter now, as it is not as simple as it may first sound. There are treaties, Mr. Speaker, such as the Vienna Accord of 1968, that we recognize as a result of our relationship with the United Kingdom. Such conventions, Mr. Speaker, allow Cayman driver's license holders clear privileges in host countries. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is necessary for us to do the same here. Mr. Speaker, while we did recognize and make changes to this effect in our 2011 revision, there were some unforeseen circumstances that arose in the practical application of the law through the years that required us to make further and more distinct changes. As a result, Mr. Speaker, it was necessary to clearly distinguish the difference between a visitor, a new resident, and a resident. First, Mr. Speaker, let me reassure this honorable House that this is not an immigration issue. It is simply that we had to find a way to clearly define or separate out each type of road user coming to or on our shores. For example, as is reciprocated to persons with a Cayman driver's license by convention countries, such as the UK, USA, Canada, and others, we need to allow for such persons landing on our shores to drive with limitations on their foreign licenses in Cayman. While some are doing this at the moment, the current draft of the law left others in precarious situations, while others found loopholes to work around for their benefit. For instance, Mr. Speaker, some tourists, if they were familiar with the law, could come and drive without a visitor's permit, while others were being charged, and unfortunately sometimes at a markup by the rental companies for the same privilege. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, there have been some cases in which the current law also prevented Caymanians, while not resident here, and therefore not having a Cayman driver's license, but having a valid license from their country of residence, were not allowed to drive on that country's license because, in effect, they were, by definition of the current law, also Caymanian or a resident. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the definition of visitor was changed to mean a person who, one, has been granted permission to stay in the islands for a period not exceeding 6 months, or two, does not reside in the islands but has been granted permission to stay in the islands for a period of more than 6 months. To make it clear, let me give a real example, Mr. Speaker. A Caymanian born, but after many years, and now married and living in Canada or anywhere else, makes an annual summer trek back to his island for the customary family reunion. He arrives at our airport and, having both Cayman and Canadian passports, has no issues with entering. In fact, doesn't get a time limit because obviously he's Caymanian. But he only has a Canadian driver's license, Mr. Speaker. And so when he goes to rent a car, they naturally ask him for his passport to see his status. Of course, that's where the trigger occurs. And under the current law, rental agencies won't rent to him because, Mr. Speaker, he's essentially a Caymanian without a Cayman driver's license. While I will address this in more detail further on, let me also point at this juncture, Mr. Speaker, that the new categories also now regularize the policy and procedures for convention country licenses that come to our shores for the purpose of employment. In these cases, Mr. Speaker, such licenses will be able to transfer or exchange their existing driver's license for that of a Cayman Islands driver's license within the first 6 months of landing on our shores with only having to pass the written portion of the exam. While the time limit varies somewhat by jurisdiction, this is what Cayman driver's license holders also enjoy if they move to a convention country. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, our current law has some contradictory language in it that allows some persons who should have to do this within 3 months to reset the clock by briefly leaving and then returning, or in other words, Mr. Speaker, essentially enjoying another bite of the apple, so to speak. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, we created a new category called a new resident. That means a person intending to live in Cayman for an extended period, but within the first 6 months of their initial arrival. Naturally, this also led to the existing definition of resident being revised to mean a person living in Cayman for an extended period beyond 6 months. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, Clause 3 simply replaces any references to the Governor and Cabinet throughout the law with reference to Cabinet in line with the 2009 Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Clause 4 amends Section 6 of the Principal Law with regard to the insurance of motor vehicles. While the current law mandates that persons maintain their vehicles' insurance to drive on our roads, it is a minimal standard, Mr. Speaker, which allows a director, through his department designates, to manually update the system, which is done usually monthly. Mr. Speaker, this is a tedious but necessary process, but one that we have found, Mr. Speaker, also allows for another one of those loopholes that I spoke to earlier. What we found, Mr. Speaker, is that some persons insure their vehicles, then go to the DVDL with the cover note to register and license it. But then, Mr. Speaker, at some point, let the insurance lapse. This is a dangerous practice that we must absolutely not tolerate. Mr. Speaker, to close this loophole, the amendment allows the director to enter into direct agreements with the insurance companies to electronically update the database through the EVR in real time. Once operational, owners can be notified electronically, and government can also be informed of persons driving illegally, that is, without insurance. I might just add, Mr. Speaker, another advantage to the EVR system. Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 allows the director to issue temporary plates if necessary, but only for a 6-month period. Currently, there is no limitation on time frame, and however, given the new EVR manufacturing system now in operation, Ministry is of the view that this time frame is more than acceptable for using temporary plates. Clause 6, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 9 of the Principal Law with regard to fines and fees owed to the government by an owner on the vehicle that's being sold or transferred. Currently, to change ownership of a vehicle, there is no requirement to pay outstanding fees or fines owed to the government by the owner of the vehicle on the vehicle. We have been made aware, Mr. Speaker, of persons receiving fines or incurring fees on a vehicle and then selling the vehicle without paying these. This amendment, Mr. Speaker, will not allow the transfer of ownership until such fines or fees have been settled or unless directed to do so by the courts. Clause 7, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 10 of the Principal Law with regards to termination of vehicle registration. Currently, Mr. Speaker, there is a $25 fee to terminate a vehicle's registration. To do this, the plates have to be turned into the DVDL. However, if it is not terminated but left on the register, it can accrue fees up to 3 years. Mr. Speaker, we've found that this $25 fee only serves to discourage persons from terminating their registration. Registering and/or licensing a vehicle is essentially a prepaid system. In other words, Mr. Speaker, you pay in advance for the amount of time you wish to have your vehicle registered and licensed to operate on our roads. If you do not come in to renew, the government can only assume you have chosen to take your vehicle off the road. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I can say with confidence that we've all seen the abandoned cars with their plates still on them, littering the roadsides around the country. While it is no excuse, Mr. Speaker, that simple fee is one reason for it. It caused many cars, even though they were destroyed in Ivan, for instance, to remain on the register, while others more recently remained as people fall behind on renewals, especially if their car, for one reason or another, isn't operational. Mr. Speaker, this was recently highlighted in the Auditor General's report. Fortunately, the ministry had already started the process of rectifying it through the electronic vehicle registration system. Mr. Speaker, this year, my ministry through the DVDL and the NRA are in the process of completing the installation of the EVR antennas. Once fully operational, the EVR system will be able to record if your vehicle's credentials are up to date. That is, as you drive, we will be able to tell seamlessly if you have renewed your vehicle's license and registration. Mr. Speaker, this is yet another advantage of the EVR system. Mr. Speaker, we also understand the practicality of the situation and the burden it now sometimes places on the road user to suspend or terminate their vehicle. For example, Mr. Speaker, in many cases, a vehicle is taken off the road for repairs, and over time, the cost to renew became prohibitive. This only snowballs out of control, and the user is left with a car that over time becomes derelict. As a result, we felt it was better to make this requirement free of cost so as to encourage persons to turn in their plates and terminate the vehicle's registration. Mr. Speaker, we've also gone a step further with this bill. As drafted, proposes an amnesty for current owners that have not relicensed their vehicles because these fees have become too burdensome. Once in effect, this law gives approximately 6 months, or until the end of the year, for owners to turn in their registration plate and/or strike the vehicle from the register for no cost. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we're resetting the clock. If the vehicle is out of service because of repairs, for example, or it can be relicensed as a new vehicle, or relicensed as a new used vehicle, or relicensed again, when it is ready to be brought back onto our roads. Subsequently, Mr. Speaker, fees will be liable upon relicensing, and if made to lapse again, will only be accrued for a year. To keep the register up to date, the director holds the authority to then suspend or strike it from the register once it's made to lapse for more than a year. By keeping a register that's current and categorized in this manner, the government will have a better handle on the total number of vehicles we have on island and the number of vehicles registered and on the road, as well as the number of vehicles not registered but on the road, and finally, the number of vehicles not registered or operational. Mr. Speaker, Clause 8 amends Section 11 of the Principal Law with regards to vehicles that couldn't be imported into the islands without written consent of the director. Included in this category, as an example, Mr. Speaker, was a popular nostalgic vehicle, the Mini Moke. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the 2011 revision, these vehicles were not considered roadworthy without some work. Over the years, however, the company has reformed and redesigned the vehicle. There is interest in having them on our streets again, and the Director of Licensing is comfortable with allowing them to again operate on our roads. Mr. Speaker, as part of the tidying up of the existing law, Clause 9 amends Section 13 of the principal law that deals with the exemption of fees. This was rather haphazardly dealt with in Section 15.1, which also dealt with the suspension of vehicles. Now, Mr. Speaker, Section 13 addresses all the issues as it relates to the exemption of fees. Mr. Speaker, Clause 10, Section 14, with regard to the duration of and the fees for licensing a previous vehicle, deals with the duration of and the fees for licensing a vehicle. Previously, a vehicle could only be licensed for a maximum of 3 years and inspected annually, even if the vehicle was new. The government, Mr. Speaker, recognized that this was rather impractical for new, advanced vehicles of today, tedious to the customer, and taxed government resources as well. Given that most new vehicles are sold through the dealerships and are maintained regularly, we felt that this time could be extended to 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the amendment also recognizes that as the vehicle ages, inspections to the vehicle will become more critical. Therefore, a graduated regime is incorporated for the inspection and licensing. Level 1, Mr. Speaker, 5 years for a new vehicle being registered for the first time in the islands that has not been registered anywhere before. Level 2, 3 years for a vehicle that is less than 10 years old if the vehicle was registered before. And level 3, 1 year for a vehicle that is more than 10 years old, whether or not the vehicle has been registered before. Mr. Speaker, I would note that this will not decrease revenue to the government, as I remind the Honorable House of the aforementioned premise of paying in advance that remains unchanged. However, Mr. Speaker, it will reduce the number of visits the customers will have to make to the DVDL to license and/or inspect the vehicle. Going forward after the amnesty, Mr. Speaker, the change also allows for any future back fees that become owed to the government to be paid over a 3-month installment. I might also take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to note that we have and will continue to develop the DVDL's online portal, and as a result, once inspected and registered for the first time, it will be easy as sitting at your computer and renewing at your leisure. So, Mr. Speaker, I would urge all customers, all of us and those listening, to go to the DVDL and receive your electronic ID number so that they can go online at any time to renew their vehicle or driver's license or make changes. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to use the system a couple of weeks ago and found it to be quite effective, and I was able to renew my driver's license and make changes to my address, etc., which I hadn't done for years, online, and I had a response confirming everything was done within a couple of days. So I personally can recommend it. Mr. Speaker, moving on, Clause 11 and 14 amends Section 15 and 22 respectively as a further cleanup exercise that relocates the suspension of a vehicle and the length of the time that a vehicle can be suspended from Section 13 to Section 15. While, Mr. Speaker, Section 22 allows for regulations to be made for fees with regards to duplicate receipts. Continuing with the cleanup, Mr. Speaker, Clause 12 amends Section 18.2 to correct a mistaken cross-reference. Section 18.2 of the current law, Mr. Speaker, allows the Commissioner of Police to issue special permits to special vehicles, such as large, oversized cranes, to be driven on the road. it referred to Section 112, but really should have referred to Section 111 that notes that the criteria under which these special vehicles can operate. Mr. Speaker, Clause 13 amends Section 21 to limit the issuance of trade plates. These are plates used by vehicle dealers to showcase or to test drive vehicles. These would be limited to 1 year and to correct a mistaken reference in subsection 4. Mr. Speaker, previously, a trade plate could only be issued for 3 months at a time. This clause, Mr. Speaker, also added a new subsection empowering the director to request the holder of the trade plates to surrender or renew them, and makes it an offense to fail to comply with such a request. Mr. Speaker, Clause 15 adds a new Part 2A to the law, providing for electronic vehicle registration, or EVR. This section, Mr. Speaker, allows for the use of radars and cameras to register vehicles as it passes the devices, and further allows for the information to be used in court proceedings. It is a comprehensive section to allow for the devices to be installed in fixed and or temporary or mobile locations. For example, Mr. Speaker, for use in speed traps or roadside inspections by the Royal Cayman Islands Police Services. While I won't dwell on it, Mr. Speaker, I might also take this opportunity to touch on the piece that appeared in the Cayman Compass that highlighted the heavy fine for tampering with such equipment. Mr. Speaker, the way the law is worded, it means that the fines can be up to $10,000. And while these fines relate to the actual license on the vehicles and the tag on the vehicles, it also covers the much more expensive equipment such as the cameras and the antennas used for the DVR system. And so we've allowed that breadth of fines, or that range of fines, to cover the more pressing or the more expensive items and the more delicate items such as the DVR systems and their antennas and cameras. Continuing on, Mr. Speaker, Clause 16 amends Section 25B1 as a consequence of the renumbering of Section 29 by Clause 18, Clause 17, by Clause 18. Clause 17 and 18 amend Section 28 and 29 respectively with regards to visitors' permits. As mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Speaker, the current law has some contradictory language in it, and as a result, it allows for visitors to drive on their license, yet it also calls for a visitor's permit to be issued. Mr. Speaker, the DVDL has found it confusing for tourists and hard to regulate. The amendment also revises the time period for which a visitor, that is, anyone driving on a convention country's license, from 3 months to 6 months. This is similar to policy in most other convention countries, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these changes also recognize that some neighboring countries are non-convention countries. For example, Honduras and others in our neighboring countries, neighboring region. And in such cases, Mr. Speaker, it allows persons from those countries to drive an island for a period of 1 month. Clause 19 is a further cleanup exercise that renumbers Section 28.8 to 14 to a new Section 29A as it relates to international driver's permits and the references to the aforementioned conventions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, clauses 20 and 21 amends section 30 and 41 respectively with regard to the issuance of driver's licenses. Mr. Speaker, section 30 allows persons who hold a driver's license that has expired within the preceding 10 years to renew without retaking the test, provided that they show proof that they've held another license for the last 10 years. The existing law only allowed a grace period of 5 years. This was particularly onerous to Caymanians living abroad. Again, Mr. Speaker, we know of cases where students, for example, studying overseas and did not get to renew their licenses given they were off island. We felt it was impractical to ask that on their return to Cayman, they retake the test to attain a new license. Of course, in conjunction with the new online system, renewing their license while overseas will now be relatively easy to undertake. Clause 41 was simply renumbered to Section 30A to coincide with Section 30. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the period for which a driver's license is valid was extended to 10 years if the prescribed fees are paid. This is in line with other first world jurisdictions. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, the amendment allowed for a person to decide the date of expiry. Currently, the time is set that it's either 1, 3, or 5 years from the date it was taken out or renewed. Mr. Speaker, the ministry have had many complaints from customers that prefer to have their license expire on their birthdays, which serves as a reminder. However, if your birthday happened to fall on a weekend or on a holiday and your license needed renewing, you would have to establish a new date. As a result, many license expires just days before or after the person's birthday. Mr. Speaker, the set time period was created back in the 2011 revision, as DVDL's system could not facilitate the varying end of dates. As touched on previously, Mr. Speaker, the ministry, with the assistance of Computer Services and E-Government Department, have modernized its systems through the EVR to allow this flexibility and offer enhanced customer service. So, Mr. Speaker, now an individual will be able to choose their expiry date, obviously within the yearly limitations. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that the amendments above are also in line with the standards and procedures across the Commonwealth. Mr. Speaker, clauses 22 and 23 amend sections 45(2) and 47(1), respectively, with regard to public transport, to the Public Transport Board. It changes the membership of the Public Transport Board, or the PTB, by substituting for the director of the Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, a representative to a representative of the Cayman Islands Airport Authority, CIAA. This was due to the split in roles and the creation of the CIAA. Section 47(1) aims to clarify that the prohibition against driving public passenger vehicles without a permit only applies to public passenger vehicles for hire. So in other words, if the family vehicle is a taxi and one of the family drives that taxi to the supermarket to pick up groceries and back home, then it would not be considered as a offense. But if that family member were to drive the vehicle out to pick up passengers, then it would be considered an offense. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Honorable Minister and the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport for working with us on bringing these amendments. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, Mr. Speaker, but I believe that it is the ministry's intent to bring further amendments to this particular section of the law. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we are made to understand, and we indeed support the minister, that it be removed from this law and a new public transport bill be brought for consideration before this honorable House. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, clauses 24, 25, 26, and 27 amend parts 5 and section 53 through 55 respectively. Part 5, which includes section 53 through 56, previously dealt with the special electric vehicles, that is, small, underpowered electric vehicles that required special routes because of their drivability. However, the ministry felt that it was necessary to retitle Part 5 to Special Purpose Vehicles, given the potential for other vehicles similar in nature, but not necessarily electric. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, a discrepancy was found in Section 53, whereby such vehicles should only be driven in school zones. This was not the intent of the law, but rather to allow such vehicles to be operated wherever the designated speed is 30 miles per hour or less, and not just in a school zone. Mr. Speaker, the clause also inserts a new provision to restrict the driving of amphibious ATVs to routes designated by the director at a speed of 35 miles per hour or less, and includes a contravention of this section as an offense in subsection 2. Mr. Speaker, such vehicles are used in the tourism industry, and as our market diversifies, we may find other types of unique vehicles that fall into this category for these special applications. This section now gives broader range to the director, Mr. Speaker, to exercise his expertise on registering and licensing such vehicles. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, Section 54 and 55 simply make the provisions that formerly apply to a special electric vehicle applicable to any special purpose vehicles. These provisions are the typical criteria and/or requirements for roadworthiness, such as lights, brakes, and how the vehicle should be operated on the road. Mr. Speaker, clauses 28 and 29 amends sections 62 and 63 respectively. With regard to inspections for vehicles' roadworthiness. Section 62, Mr. Speaker, defines the limits of the certificate of roadworthiness. This is in line with the clauses 10, section 14, which now sets out new time limits for licensing. Given the nature of government's systems and infrastructure and the process to inspect, register, and/or license a vehicle, it is necessary to extend this period to 2 months beyond the time limit for registration, licensing. In many cases, Mr. Speaker, this two-part process is not completely synchronized. Therefore, additional time allows a customer, if they so choose, to register or to license their vehicle online with enough time to have the vehicle first inspected at a designated facility, then completing the transaction at a later time online. Given government's commitment to improve the customer service experience, Section 63 allows the owner of the vehicle to submit it for inspection at any time in the month before the due date or renewal of the license. Mr. Speaker, the current law does not provide for this flexibility and instead bogs down the process and burdens the customer with having to complete the full transaction in 1 day. Mr. Speaker, Clause 30 inserts a new section, 77A, into the law that pertains to motorcycles disturbing the public peace. Mr. Speaker, I won't spend too much time on this, as this was an amendment brought by the Honorable Attorney General's Chambers on behalf of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. But suffice it to say, we are in full support of the amendment. Mr. Speaker, it empowers a constable to stop, seize, or enter premises, search for a motorcycle or moped that is or was used in a manner that is likely to cause harm, alarm, distress, or annoyance to members of the public. These powers would also apply where a motorcycle or moped is or was driven carelessly or dangerously, contrary to sections 76 or 77 of the law. The new section also makes it an offense for a person who has been ordered to stop their motorcycle or moped not to comply with the order. Mr. Speaker, this is a direct result of the numerous complaints by the public to this regard and the ineffectiveness of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service because of no such provisions in the law. Mr. Speaker, Clause 31 amends Section 94 to make the use of a special purpose vehicle in contravention of Section 53(2) a ticketable offense. For clarity, Mr. Speaker, Sections 53(2) refers to and recognizes the criteria under which a special purpose vehicle can operate. The clause also amends Section 94(2) to require persons who wish to plead guilty and pays a ticket to do so before the date and time for the hearing of the charge. Again, Mr. Speaker, clauses 32 and 33 amend sections 106 and 113 respectively as a result of amendments brought by the Honorable Attorney General's Chambers. Section 106 gives Cabinet the power to make regulations governing the removal, retention, release, and disposal of motorcycles or mopeds seized under the new Section 77A, added to the law by Clause 30, while Section 113 deals with the removal of vehicles to the compound by broadening its scope to cover motorcycles and mopeds seized by a constable under the new Section 77A, added to the law by Clause 30. Mr. Speaker, Clause 34 amends Section 123(2) to change a cross-reference in consequence of the renumbering of Section 28 by Clause 17. Mr. Speaker, Clause 35 is a transitional provision providing a temporary amnesty for arrears of fees that I spoke to earlier. Mr. Speaker, as I said in the introduction of this bill, the ministry went at it with a pragmatic view, and I believe we were successful. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker and honorable members of the House, we are continuing to work with the department as a whole to make the registration and licensing as smooth and seamless as possible. This was the approach we began with, starting with the EVR, and we will continue to develop our system to improve efficiency and the customer experience. This will take some time, Mr. Speaker, so I ask for everyone's patience, but I also encourage them to continue to apprise me of your ideas for change and your experiences at the licensing department. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the same for anyone visiting any of the agencies under the ministry. Mr. Speaker, our next step is in this process is the traffic regulations. Undertaken in conjunction with this law, it addresses issues such as the proper use of a roundabout, new road markings, and more consideration for the pedestrian. Work has already been wrapped up on this. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we will be taking it for Cabinet's consideration shortly, then God's willing, brought into effect thereafter. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to briefly touch on other traffic and transportation matters that the ministry are working on. Mr. Speaker, under a steady government, our economy is growing. Therefore, we must find a holistic and sustainable solution to our traffic and transportation issues. As a result, Mr. Speaker, my ministry is now studying this, and we want to further incentivize efficient vehicles like smaller electric cars, possibly even buses, that give us efficient, reliable public transportation that anyone and everyone can use, and encourage pedestrian and short-range movement. It is an issue I feel strongly about, Mr. Speaker, and I've charged my ministry with the anticipation that I can present to this honorable House some solutions that we can all be in favor of. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the bill I lay before this honorable House will meet the goals I've spoken to here today and help us realize our potential and strengthen our hand at enforcement, and as I will reiterate, create a safer environment on our roads for our citizens. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to offer a word of thanks to the many stakeholders that spent countless hours meeting, debating, and reviewing this bill to get it to this stage. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to mention the legal department and those that were charged with the drafting of this law, as I know they have spent many, many hours and attended many, many meetings over the years on these amendments. To the public, Mr. Speaker, I urge them to familiarize themselves with this law and get to know it, use it, and most importantly, be conscious of your fellow road users, whether they be pedestrians, cyclists, or motorists. So, Mr. Speaker, I now seek the approval of this honorable House in passing the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018 into law, subject to the amendments at the committee stage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a contribution to the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of concerns that I have with this bill. I trust the minister can try to clarify them for me or make the necessary changes if he thinks they are worthy, if my concerns are worthy. The traffic law is always a convoluted one, always difficult to make changes to and get things right. The minister said it has been changed a number of times over the years, which is true. but it was totally repealed in 2011. It was repealed in 2011, a whole new law the now Minister for Education brought. Mr. Speaker, which was, I had started before I left, and then she completed. Took me 4 years, and I still didn't get it done. And 7 years, and we are now repealing the most of that. And it's the same people. Mr. Speaker, let me start with Section 2. Section 2. In B, I think it is, in D, where the minister says he is now applying a new definition for visitor so that he can capture those Caymanians who have lived overseas and don't have a Cayman license. I don't know how this is going to capture that Caymanian, because A says, this is under D now, A says has been granted permission to stay on the island for a period not exceeding 6 months. I guess that's the person who is not a Caymanian, does not reside in the islands, and has been granted permission to stay for a period of more than 6 months. Which Caymanian is granted time to stay here? I would like to see that person. So we need to think about that. Mr. Speaker, I would like to move on to 4, subsection 4, where it says the principle is amended in section 6 by inserting after section 4 the following subsection, 4A, for the purpose of assessing compliance with the motor vehicle insurance third-party risk law, 2012 revision and regulation. The director may enter into an agreement with an insurer as defined in that law, governing the updating of the register for any alterations of insurance coverage of registered vehicles for which the insurer provides insurance. Mr. Speaker, I hope that is not going to encroach on people's rights. I hope the rights under the Bill of Rights does not get encroached upon here, because there is a personal agreement between two parties, the insurer and the insured. And if government encroaches on that, we could be, I'm no constitutional lawyer, but I don't think it's fair if I'm in an agreement with an entity to provide me a service for government to encroach on that. That's not fair. Likewise, you cannot go to the bank, any bank, and try to find out what I own there unless it's an order by the court because of some encroachment on the from a criminal perspective. And my electricity bill and my telephone bill, that company can't give you my personal information. Are we kidding? But that's us approving it here. We can't do that. What happened with the constitutional rights of that person? You see? We are legitimizing an illegal activity. That's a serious matter. I provide you with evidence that I have insurance, and they come behind and give you information on me? Roy Borden was right, 20 years ago? The need for that Bill of Rights. I hope it is implemented properly. Can't provide my private information to government without my approval. Illegally? This traffic department and ministry think they're an entity unto themselves or what? Mr. Speaker, I would ask the government to be very careful with this. That's what they use this legislature for. Because there's an agreement between you and the bank for that. When you get the balloon. Exactly. That's right, and I provided it for you. I provided it for you. But there's no agreement between me and government or me and that insurance provider to provide it to the government. With the bank, I have an agreement with a mortgage to maintain it. And if I don't, look at the fine writing. If I don't, the insurance, they can inquire of the insurance. There's no such thing with government. Mr. Speaker, I bring that to the attention of the government. Mr. Speaker, I move on now to 5. And the minister said that this provision, and I wanted to get him on a point of elucidation from him, but, and I don't know if he said it would make provisions for the director to issue plates for 6 months, for up to 6 months. That's part of the law now. That's the law now. Yeah, just check it there, see if I know that I want to say. Mr. Speaker, my concern is much bigger than that. My concern is that we engage in a system, must be about 3 years now, to change out our system of plates and registration to better identify vehicles and identify vehicles. And to this date, this morning, coming to this honorable house, I see vehicles without license plates. Really? They don't even have temporary on them. some still have temporary. The minister is appealing to the whole country, go get your plates. Where are the police in this matter? I am required by law to have prescribed plates on my vehicle, and everybody else can have what they want. And nobody does anything about it. I see some with European plates. I see some with plates people get made. I report it to the police. Nothing is done. The licensing department sits down and does nothing to enforce it. The police does nothing to enforce it. It is only a select few that it is being enforced upon. Mr. Speaker, temporary plates by law, current law, no amendment. Eight four. No. Eight four, Mr. Speaker, in the traffic law 2011. Where the director is unable to issue permanent license plates, he may issue temporary license plates of such design and dimensions as he may determine, but such plates shall be issued for a period not exceeding 6 months. Mr. Speaker, they cannot make rules to trump the laws made by this honorable House. No one is allowed to do that. And we are still with temporary license plates all over the place on vehicles that entered this country years ago. At least 2 years. Because this system was 3-4 years has been at least 3 years in the making. And my observation is that they got so many different colors now, it look like Christmas tree if you get some of these vehicles lined up. Blue, white, whatever the case may be, which are prescribed license plates designed by the director. And then you see so many different types of plates that has no relevance to the ones that seem to be the standard ones. Mr. Speaker, I recently made complaints about that and the on-road worthiness of some of these vehicles, the trucks, the this, the that, to the police. They tell me they need people from traffic out with them, identify that the license plate is obscure, that the tires are worn down to the tread, that the trucks are overloaded, it's not covered, Really? Mr. Speaker, within 12 hours, less than that, that day, later on that day, they had a roadblock, seemingly because I had complained. And the next day they called me to say that they had caught just one trailer truck with 31 offenses on it. And they had stopped over 100 vehicles that was not roadworthy. Really? Mr. Speaker, I say all that to say you cannot legislate morality. You can put it here, and what we are doing is putting it here and expecting people to carry it out. You need to enforce it. My life, my family's life, is being endangered by the police and the license department. And everyone here, they need to do their job. No, we are afraid to say it. I am not. You're going to tell me, Mr. Speaker, the tailgates on trucks are banded around with the yellow things, yellow straps for cargo straps? And I'm the only one seeing that? I know could never be these two little eyes are so good. No license plates, which is the subject at hand. No headlamps. You mean it's only me drive at night and see people with no brake light and no backlight? Could never be, man. I want to had seen all that. And if we saw it, the police had to see it. What are they doing? No, that's not their concern because they're not in the traffic department. Who's responsible for the police or only administratively? But I trust that it will get back to the right quarters. I know they can't be everywhere all the time. Mr. Speaker, I was on the road one night going into town. A vehicle passed me without lights. I was on the double carriageway right there by the Lion Center. A police car was maybe a couple 100 feet in front of me in the other lane. The car came around me, behind the police car, went around the police car before we reached the Jim one roundabout, King's roundabout. All three of us went into the roundabout and continued down Linford Pearson Highway. No lights. In front of the police car. I turned by Jose, and both of them continued on. No lights. And I didn't see any blue ones either. Is that how it works? Mr. Speaker, when I reach the section about these cameras that's going to be a different thing that we need to talk about. I got to deal with it in 2 hours. Get over it. Mr. Speaker, the minister, I ain't gonna go through all it because it's too much. It takes forever to bring up all of the matters that are in here. Mr. Speaker, Section 7 talks about the director may, if a vehicle has not been licensed for a continuous period of 1 year, consider license of the vehicle to be expired. Well, we got 3 years now. And then we're going to drop. Mr. Speaker, I believe it was the UDP government administration that brought that, where people's license had been out so long, and when they went to renew their vehicles, and we brought it to 3 years, that they would have to pay up to 3 years. Now we bring that down to 1 year. People have to take some responsibilities, man. And then we're looking at minimum. I wonder whose ingenious idea that was. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if those who considered that understand why minimokes were banned in this country. That was minimoke then? Where are these vehicles being manufactured now? Have they been, do we have any statistical data to say that they can sustain side impacts? I want everybody to understand the reason those mokes were banned. Who in here? The member from West Bay Central. You met Mr. Speaker. And you. Who else? Maybe the Minister of Education, and maybe the member from South Sound can remember in the front of Government House, the Governor's House. At the time it was administrator, that a truck ran completely over a minimum and killed everybody in there. Do we remember that? And one in West Bay, the same day Easy got killed. Understand what they're doing? These things are structural and sound. They cannot take a side impact because there's nothing around the person. You know, Mr. Speaker, may I beg your indulgence? May I tell these young Turks how we banned motorbikes? We banned it for the same reason. We banned it for the same reason. Let me explain to them how it came back. The member from Cayman Brack, we wanted to take license off bicycles because bicycles were required to have a license. Someone who wasn't born. And the compromise was to change from moped and open it up for motorbikes. Honestly, what happening with motorbikes now? Every soul getting killed on them. That's what was causing it from the beginning, why we banned it. Minimoke, same thing. Pink ladies, I don't know what they were. Well, you think we banned them? Because it was killing people. They were the one of the means of renting to tourists. And we were shipping tourists out of here like we were shipping tap rope to Jamaica. The but is, my good friends, colleagues, I beg of you, not at the wishes of the few, protect this country from that kind of behavior. Not for a fistful of dollars for a few people to rent those mopeds out. Do not allow mopeds back in this country. Minimokes, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. And those open jeeps without any protection around the occupants. We are like pin cushions, you know. The last pin that stick you left an impression. We need to stop that. We need to stop it. We need to look back. There is a specific reason why everything has been done. Well, you think we haven't had them for, I bet you it's close 4 to 5 years. 4 to 5 years. Before I left school. Why do we think we had them? We banned them. You think it's just because somebody wanted to put it in here? Many mokes were here. And every one of them were painted green when they came out. Remember Tony with the little top on it? If I got good memory, yeah, man. But somebody wants to rent these out now, and we're going to lift the ban on them. The restriction on them. Mind you, it's not only the occupant of those minimokes that suffers as a result of the damage that they can cause, it is the other drivers too. Be careful, it may be one of us. Mr. Speaker, I don't know. Mr. Speaker, I'm moving on because I had my say. I said what I had to say. Mr. Speaker, I see where under 10, the government proposes to issue license for vehicles, new ones for 5 years, with the hope that it will not clog up, will ease the congestion at the licensing department. More efficient. I hope the electronic provisions that we hope to come will perform that purpose, will be for that purpose. But the minister says it will reduce the amount of trips for the person to the licensing department. I don't know if the minister will be right with that altogether, entirely correct. Because 2 says, subsection 2 of 10 says, 2A, where a license is issued for 5 years under subsection 2, the license fee may be paid annually in increments of 20% of the total fee for the 5-year period. So you still go in there once a year, go pay it. Or pay it online. But you can't license online. Pay it online What about those who can't pay it online? The fact that someone bought a new car and can't pay for 5 years means he can't get on that. He can't get on that online. That's an excuse. If you got licensed car for 5 years, you license it. But we're talking about, and going back to the insurance thing, then no insurance is issued for 5 years. No insurance is issued for 5 years. 1 year. Stop with the feel good talk about these things. It doesn't work. Mr. Speaker, I got the same disease as you. He said that? You got worried about him? He ain't got nothing for me. And I got less for him. Mr. Speaker, I want to go to this Part 2A, electronic vehicle registration. Mr. Speaker, we have been speaking about this for some time. In this honorable House, in presentation with the Commissioner of Police, with the Governor, with ministers, for a long time. Now they have brought this to make us feel good. That's the only thing it can be. Because, Mr. Speaker, it just doesn't make sense for us to employ all these electronic gimmicks, tools, and then the person still got to go to court. That makes absolutely no sense. There are no provisions in here for ticketable offenses under the electronic means. If it is, somebody needs to show it to me. Mr. Speaker, it's so sad that this country has to go to the distance of using mechanical means, whether we call it electronic or whatever, to curb people's behavior. But I should tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it is an absolute necessity now. But why is it we're gathering the information and how it's handled, where it's handled, whose custody it's in, all defined by legislation, and we're not making it a ticketable offense so we don't clog up our courts? Because not all offenses can be detected by cameras. But certainly there are a number: speeding, overtaking on the wrong side, all those things. School zones in particular, I brought a motion in 2015 talking about that. This is 3 years later. Mr. Premier, that's what we need. Make it a ticketable offense. Like, for instance, in the school zone. You find somebody in there exceeding the speed limit when the lights are flashing, $500. You are sent the evidence through the mail, and you are given 1 month to pay the $500 fine. No, that old pedestrian crossing, I don't know what they did that for. No, the school zones flash in the morning and the afternoon. It's confusing. That's the pedestrian crossing. Yeah, yeah. It's flashing all the time, pedestrian crossing. Mr. Speaker, but we need to employ some system. And I hear the Premier that they're flashing and maybe malfunctioning or something like that. The one up in the middle of the street? The one in the middle of the street?
The one before you get to the one that stops you in front of the school, they don't pay any mind. Trust me, there's two of them, Samantha does, excuse me.
And,
That's my pet peeve.
and Mr. Speaker, when you go through that zone and that camera recognizes you, takes a picture, the picture is sent to you the next day and you got a $500 fine. Now, if you challenge that and question that, you can go to court and we'll be there with all our evidence to prove that it was you. Or you prove that you wasn't in the car, but find out who was in the car. That's all. Why are we just gathering this information so we can go to court with? All we're doing is further blocking up the process. I have a friend of mine who lives in Florida. He was telling me the other day he was rushing to go pick up something. And he decided 100 feet away from getting out of the school zone to speed up. No children over at that side because they had just passed. $397 the next week. All electronic. So he didn't have to pay it. He could wait. He could wait. And then he loses his license. Simple. And if you do more than 3, on the third one you lose your license for 2 years. They have no respect for our children. And if we do not protect our children, there will be no future in this country. We need those same cameras in the school buses, transmitting direct to the holding station, or whatever we want it is called, for the fixed cameras. It can be done. They're wireless. And those who pass the bus gets their little piece of the pie too. $500 again. You will soon see behaviors changing. But I am required to drive 15 miles an hour in that zone, and the trucks are passenger loaded. Mr. Speaker, in a former life, that's what my family and I did. I know how difficult it is to stop a loaded truck. At 15, much less 50. But nobody pays attention. The morning the police are out by Savannah, their wheels are turning backwards. They're going so slow. Is that what it takes for us to have to engage in such expenditure to deploy policemen to stand on the side of the road so people can respect our children? I chased one the other day from Bodden Town. He went through the Bodden Town one, passed me right in the middle of it in front of Cable and Wireless, in one of the Safari Jeeps. Tried. When I reached by Mr. Elliott, he had gone across the hill. And I followed him. And I know he didn't have more gas than me, and I would have find him that day. I called And he went straight east then. And when he stopped by the blowhole, I decided to call the police and keep them on the phone so they could hear what I was going to tell him. And it wasn't good. Police said they couldn't do anything about it. So I said, that's fine. I can do it, though. And he was filled with tourists. That's for your information, Mr. Minister of Tourism. When he got by the blowhole, I blocked him in. You can ask him. There must have been about 6 or 8 tourists in the back. Yeah. And I embarrassed him. Trust me. Well, tourism is everybody's business, but the protection of my people is my business too. I'm sorry. You sorry? There's no need for you to complain to be sorry. Your apologies are not accepted. That was simple. Mr. Speaker, we need to employ a different camera system than the government is proposing. Put a film in it, the members say. Mr. Speaker, I see some of these provisions in here, Mr. Speaker, says, I brought to the attention of one of the drafters who hadn't drafted this, and I trust that that person has shown them, and one of the staff as well. I don't even see the chief officer down here trying to understand this. So who will communicate this to the chief officer to get these things done? Huh? Ah, boy. One of these days, we all come to full circle. Mr. Speaker, under 18, the minister should know that, and it may be not, I don't know if it's right, but 18C, it says E. It says in subsection 4, by deleting the word written and substituting the word road. I don't know which one of the word written in there needs to be deleted, or you're changing that. But you can't delete both. And if you delete the first one, it'll road and road. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that he can do that. Mr. Speaker, on this international license, I just don't understand. It seems rather convoluted to me, and I can be corrected, that in one breath, we're saying the whole of an international driver's permit issued outside the islands and in accordance with the international conventions with respect to international circulation of vehicles to which the islands have adhered shall, while the international driver's permit remains valid, be exempt from the requirements to hold a driver's license under this law to drive in the islands a vehicle of the group for which the person holds an authorization to drive in the country in which the international driver's permit was issued. And then it goes on to talk about those issued here. But then 5 says an international driver's permit, meaning in this country, which I assume would B29A12, shall, unless suspended by a court, remain in effect for 12 months from the date of issue. But in one breath, we're saying it's valid if it's issued outside, but the minister will agree that different countries issue them for different durations. Some countries issue them for 3 years, some for 2, some for 1, some for 3 months. International driver's license. I have done my research too. And then, because 7 says, except as otherwise specifically stated or contradicted in this law does not derogate from any privilege or obligation accorded to any person by virtue of a convention referred to in Section 28. 1. So whatever privileges that are accorded to that person coming from overseas, this law cannot overrule it. That's what that says. So if that is issued for 3 years, you can't say it's only valid for 1 here or 6 months. If we accept that we are parties to those conventions and that country issues their international license for 3 years, we cannot make any law to take anything away from the privileges of that, because we subscribe to it. I trust that somebody will look at that and see if that is the case. Mr. Speaker, I ain't going in to much else other than the minister said that the regulations will look at things like how to use a roundabout and new signage and the likes. I hope it also shows what type of pedestrian crossing we need to employ here. I see one those down behind it like a booby. Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, we were told, more than 3, we were told in here on one Monday that set along West Bay Road would be changed by Friday. Fridays have come and gone. As the Indians say, many sunset has come and gone. I know what. We need to teach some of these people how to use roundabout. Some of them stop right in the middle of that to give you access onto it. You know. I think that Mr. Thunder or what? Anyway, I don't know. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to see some of these things, but they're seriously, in my estimation, cannot be. The minister said it was a pragmatic approach. I don't know if it's possible for these things to work in a manner that we're going to get maximum results, like the cameras, like those international license. And I agree we need to take that public transport away from this law. I've been here since 2000, November 2000. And that was one of the first things we were talking about. Public transport removed from the traffic law. it's an entity unto itself. I don't see one of them here today. They have managers, they have boards, they have this, they have that. But it's under the traffic law. Who has no business with public transport? None. The director of license shouldn't, he don't even know how many buses they got on the road, except if he go on and look and look to see how much is registered that he approved for roadworthiness. Huh? Mr. Speaker, I just wish to
Honorable
read-
member,
Yes, sir.
we have reached the hour of 10. How much longer do you have?
2 seconds. Well, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I was going to say all else I have to do is to read the resolve of that motion that I did in 2015 that was accepted by this honorable House. Be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the traffic law 2011 and the traffic regulations 2012 and the traffic ticket regulations 2012 to allow for more severe penalties, to include a mandatory 1-year suspension of driver's license for speeds exceeding 5 miles per hour over the prescribed 15 miles per hour within the school zone when amber lights are flashing. Mr. Speaker, I think we amended it a little bit to say not the suspension of the license, but fines. But we debated extensively about whether or not it should be a ticketable offense, and then suspension. Mr. Speaker, that's what we're looking for. That's what we need. Mechanisms, electronic, arm drop down or whatever, to stop people with these crazy behaviors, particularly in areas where people are vulnerable. Old people, aged people, children, schools, that kind of stuff. They're driving like mad people. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honorable members feel that we could finish the debate on this bill. Are there other members wishing to speak, and will you be long? And 5 and 2 minutes to 7 minutes. How long will the mover need to reply? I think we will continue, and my best advice is to, if that's all going to speak, let's wind the bill up tonight and done with it. But I'm at the will of the House. But I would think, with all that I see that we have to do, that if we can wind it up, Honorable Minister responsible for the bill, many of these questions can be taken at committee stage, but it's up to you. The member for Central Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're probably right, Mr. Speaker, in respect to my contribution could probably be addressed at committee stage, but since I've already risen, I want to say congratulations to the Minister for addressing a lot of things in respect to the traffic law. Fundamentally, I agree with all of them except for the one that my good member from East End highlighted in respect to the mini mokes. I learned something today. I had to do some research on them, and I agree with him in respect to the safety element. Maybe they're trying to add to the tourism element of things, I don't know, but I think that is a risk as well. But I just want to ask 2 questions of the Minister that he could probably answer in his wind-up, just to satisfy me, which was, he suggested that there's going to be an amnesty for vehicles whose cars have been expired for quite some time, and they will be able to come in and just get them stricken off the record. if they don't come in, I just want to know whether they would be automatically struck off the record. Where's the minister? I was hoping that you're listening so you could probably respond to me in respect to it. The other query that I had is that I just noticed myself, Mr. Speaker, in licensing my vehicle, and I got the new system where you have the tag at the middle of your windshield, and it's no longer the sticker on the side where, in most cases, every day you get in your vehicle, you remember exactly when your car is expired because the date is right there. We no longer have that. It was a subtle reminder to say, oh boy, my car soon expire. Let me get ready to go get that license either at the end of the month or what have you. That luxury is no longer there. It's a simple little matter, but I was wondering whether the Department of DVDL has considered maybe an email blast reminder system of some sort to help the drivers not violate the law by a simple lack of memory to say, oops, I didn't realize my car was expired at the end of this month. Just having that little tag there on the side of the window helped tremendously in many cases for me. If it's something that they have considered or something they're willing to consider, it could probably stop a lot of people from simply driving on the road, and it's just because they got busy lives and stuff and they just forgot to do it. Besides that, I want to thank the Minister for trying to make the changes necessary to make our roads better.
Honorable AG.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I propose to be very brief. You heard the Honourable Minister, when he made the presentation that I might be making an intervention in respect of a particular provision in the bill. That's Clause 30, that deals with the new 77A. And Mr. Speaker, of course, the related clauses, Clause 32 and 33. They're all related. But, Mr. Speaker, in brief, honourable members are aware of the troubling occurrences, if I might put it that way, of along the Cayman roads over the last 2 years, where you have, I think, the convoy of motorbikes being ridden along the road, and especially on Sunday evenings, with terrible noise, and of course, usually on a Sunday evening when most families prefer to use that period as a period of quiet reflection, and so you have to endure all of these noise. But usually, sometimes, Mr. Speaker, as many as 50 or up to 200 motorbikes being operated along the road in a convoy. And we recall one particular incident where I think some of them were wearing bandanas and ski mask, and their bikes were being used in a very menacing and dangerous way along the roadway. People doing wheelies, weaving in and out of motor vehicle, moving traffic, in some instances running red lights, and so on. And so, of course, all of these kind of behavior endangers not only the operators of the bikes, but other road users. And so I think one of them was called there was a name that was used for it, Mr. Speaker, something about riding in the country, or the country riding. I think I have the name here somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, the ride of the country, I think it was. The ride of the country. And it was a great show of force, Mr. Speaker. With all of them, I think we saw videos of police officers taking evasive action behind some van or something when the people stormed the police roadblocks, the roadblock. So the upshot of it is that the police felt sort of somewhat impotent in the sense that the legislation was a bit limited in terms of what sort of actions they could take. And so, Mr. Speaker, representation was made to the government by the police. to look at amending the legislation to enable the police to do a number of things, including being able to stop these riders then and there where they clearly was committing a breach of the peace, being able to arrest without warrant the operators of the bikes, and most importantly, being able to seize the bike then and there. And if it is that the police have evidence that the motorcycle was being hidden in some premises after it was used to commit this breach of the peace, then the police ought to be able to enter the premises and seize the bike. And if after a certain period of time and certain steps being taken and no one claimed the motorcycle, or if the person who owned the bike refused to have it licensed and insured so that it can be properly become roadworthy and usable on the road, then after a certain period, the police should have the authority to dispose of the motorcycle. And so, Mr. Speaker, the combined effect of clauses 30, 32, and 33 will enable the police to take all of those actions once the law is passed. And so they will be able to stop these people, seize the bike, arrest without warrant, and ultimately dispose of the bikes after a period of time. And in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, that is in effect what Section 77A is all about. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I support the other provisions in the bill itself. And I certainly would also, like the Honourable Minister, commend the bill to this Honourable House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to hear the advocacy put forward by the Attorney General in regard to these motorcycles. The other night I was going up, and out of this darkness there's a motorcycle wheeling down the street and no light on. We have to put a stop to this madness. We all find ways to get kicks out of sports or whatever, but this is just too risky, and we need to take this into hand once and for all. I mean, when you see how some of them ride, it is just ridiculous. But, Mr. Speaker, I get up once again. I'm sure you and the rest of the House could be sick of me talking about these school zones. About 4 months ago, the flashing light up at Clifton Hunter, somehow or the other, the one coming from Georgetown, from the west side, was knocked out. I wasn't going to call the name, but it was done, I understand, by someone there. I called, the leader of the opposition called, we called everybody you could think about. Finally, I begged him, and he got hold of Mr. Donna E. Banks. And within 2 days, it was fixed. 2 weeks later, well, the way it was blinking, Mr. Speaker, it was just barely like how I'm getting now, going down like that. Barely see the light. It went out, and I called him again, and next time was fixed in proper fashion. But I travel on that road to Clifton Hunter, minimum of 5 days a week. Then down to Savannah, 5 days a week. In the morning, I see cars taking over into that school zone with the lights flashing. How in the world this is happening is beyond me. Are we going to wait till one of these children get ground up in front of the school? I mean, I see it. I park in the Savannah parking lot to pick up my grandson, and they're going like a bat out of hell. It is ridiculous. It is insane. When are the ministers or the government or the police or whoever in the world is responsible going to do something? I suggested putting these flashing lights, the whatever they talk about, this PC, EVR, even by the school zones that we can monitor. and put film in it, because it seemed like every time that they have one of these that they take a picture, when they go to prosecute, they find out that they didn't put anything that they could get the picture out of. When are we going to do something about this? We have to stop, and as I said in the past, and I don't recently say, we've got to stop pussyfooting. These are children that we're dealing with in the primary schools, especially from 4 to 10 years old. When are we going to do something as a legislative assembly? I am sick and tired of it. And I'm begging and I'm pleading with the ministers that are involved and the commissioner of police and the government to do something about this. And Mr. Minister of Works, I'm begging and pleading, if you want my support for this, I want you to put something specific about the school zones in this. We have to stop this nonsense that's going on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to make a brief remarks on this bill. Don't worry, it'll be very brief because I'm aware of the time. One, just for the minister to consider in terms of the deregistration of vehicles, a process to deal with that, because the derelict vehicles are actually piling up. And we're having this issue with all of these vehicles being just sometime left at the roadside. It's an issue within my constituent. And I believe that we need to get the VIN number or something and find out who some of these people are. And if need be, go charge them, find them or something. But it's kind of getting a little bit out of hand. And the second issue, Mr. Speaker, I understand from the public standpoint that there may be some privacy concerns with these electronic plates. Now, from my own research, I understand that is not the case, as some people is making it out to be. But at a minimum, I think that the ministry and the department should at least find a better way of informing the public to let them know that this isn't an invasion of their privacy, because some people out there have a tendency of thinking that their vehicles are going to be tracked left, right, and center, and people can get sometimes. So with that said, I just think the government just need to put it out there to assure the public that no one is tracking where vehicles are going, anything like that. And so that's just pretty much my comments, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister, seeking to wind up now or after tomorrow when government business resumes? You ready to wind up? The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first thank the members for their contributions and support in certain areas. Also, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member from East End, we had a sidebar with him during the dinner break, and a lot of the concerns he raised and some corrections, which we thank him for, some mistakes, typos, we'll be addressing those during the committee stages. So I'd like to thank him for that. A couple of notes I made, Mr. Speaker. The member from East End also mentioned about the director having the ability to issue temporary plates for 6 months being in the law already, and he is correct. What we have to amend in the law is, now that we have the registration, to be able to issue the registration, the electronic vehicle registration, for up to 6 months. So it's not the plate, but the actual registration. Mr. Speaker, The member from East End also raised a question about the electronic registration or updating of insurance. Mr. Speaker, at the moment in the law, the director is charged with maintaining a registrar of licensed vehicles, insurance, etc., and under the law must also provide this information to the Commissioner of Police. And so at the moment, we are collecting that information manually from the insurance companies. This electronic registration system will allow us to have that uploaded automatically on a set basis so that we can know whether there are vehicles out there and pass on that the registrar, as we do now, to the Commissioner of Police so they can know if there are vehicles out there operating on the roads without insurance. Mr. Speaker, the member from East End also spoke about the ability to renew your license for 5 years. And if you choose to pay for the 5 years, Mr. Speaker, you can do that. Other than that, you would have to update your information online or submit your information via mail, or there's an express lane where you can go in and submit your information as well as, or pay if you choose to pay annually. So it is making it easier for the customer to get their cars or renew their car licenses annually or pay that fee annually or update any information either online or through the express lines at the offices. Mr. Speaker, there was discussion also from several members about ticketable offenses under electronic means. And the provision in the law that the member from East End spoke to is actually just that. It is giving us the ability to do, in the law, to use the electronic means to issue tickets. So it is just giving us the ability to use that evidence that's collected, and it can be issued electronically. We can change that. We can use that now to issue tickets electronically, but we first had to have the ability under the law to do so. On the school zones, Mr. Speaker, I think currently, it is my understanding, I'm reliably informed, that currently you can only do electronic ticketing up to $500. And I think this, in the previous, or in the last government in this House, we passed a law, or we passed an amendment making the fines for speeding in a school zone, I think, $2,500. So we would either need to change the law to allow us to do electronic ticketing or ticketing up to that amount, or reduce back the amount to $500, which is the maximum at the moment. I'll take that certainly take it into consideration and see what we have to do. Right. If we can, we will. If we can. Mr. Speaker, the member from Georgetown Central I think he asked a question as to what would happen after the 6-month amnesty. After the 6-month amnesty, persons would then have to abide by the law and pay whatever fees are due. So we'll have 6 months from when the law take effect. We will advertise it, we will promote it, we will make it very, very easy including drop boxes, etc., for persons to surrender their plates. After the 6 months, Mr. Speaker, they will have to fall in line with the law and pay whatever fees are due. The member from Central also talked about the tag being a reminder. Mr. Speaker, the EVR system, we're working towards having automatic reminders sent out. We're very much aware of the fact that not everyone will be able to register on the EVR, but you also are reminded that you have that information in your logbook, your receipt. There's several ways you can check to see when your licensing is up. So, but overall, we hope that a majority of the population will take advantage of the online services. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I'd like to thank the members for their comments, their support, and we will bring a few of these amendments during the committee stages, and I look forward to the passage of this bill. Thank you.
Question is that a bill shortly entitled the Traffic Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Traffic Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's been a long day. I thank members for their patience and cooperation. I see that particularly our friend, Mr. Vendeleger, complains about the short meetings of the House. But I can say, Mr. Speaker, that in my almost 18 years here, this term so far has been the most productive in terms of the work rate and what we managed to get done in the House, because we focus and we work late in the evenings. It is intense, but I do believe that most members appreciate we get the work done, and then we get on with the other business that all of us, whether we're ministers or not, have to do with respect to our duties as legislators and representatives. So I thank members for their cooperation. Tomorrow is Private Members' Day, and we will work as late tomorrow evening as members on the other side wish to get through as many of the private members' motions as possible. And so, Mr. Speaker, with that, I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until 10 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning.
The question is that this Honourable House do stand adjourned until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. sharp. All in favor? Those against? The House stands adjourned until tomorrow.